I think, and my son, who's made a movie that includes Dion and Reggie and me, right over there afterwards, folks, he's making a movie on how racism, i.e. hate, became so embedded in our society right from the get-go. And now that we have crumbled the laws and customs a lot, we have this foundation still there. And we just haven't really dealt with the foundation of racism. That's our next step.
I didn't hear anybody talk about whether or not you became estranged from your university. I know my university expelled a student, and just last year gave them their degrees. And then what about your family? How was your interaction with your family?
Well, let me, go ahead, Dion. With it.
A three-part answer. We have to be taught to hate. And my theory regarding hate is it's something that has been imbued as a result of economic necessity. Everyone at the lower end of the economic ladder has to have someone to look down on. Okay? That's how they survive. That's why they will not revolt. Secondly, my parents really had no say-so whatsoever in my involvement in civil rights other than bringing me up. What they taught me as a child allowed me to develop, I think this came up before, allowed me to develop on my own. My parents found out about my being in jail via the newspaper. They had nothing to do with my involvement. I mean, actively involved, but the way they raised me allowed me to participate.
They were paying your tuition?
No, oh no. I went to school, I've been on scholarship since I got out of high school. And with scholarship money and my jobs, no, I was totally on my own. That's why I understand other kids needing parental permission to participate. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. And a lot of kids had to have parental permission in order to participate. But because I had been on my own essentially since I was a junior in high school, they had no say-so whatsoever. And my parents, while they had nothing to say about my involvement, they were awfully proud of my involvement, but they wished it was someone else's child.
The college I was attending kicked me out before I got involved in the civil rights movement, and they did so because instead of worshiping at the white Methodist church, I was worshiping at the African American Methodist church. So that was their response to my attending church. My mother thought that it was a good thing, somebody needed to do it, but wished desperately that somebody else's daughter would do it. And she had remarried, and my stepfather forbade me to come into their house. So for several years I wasn't able to go home and lost contact with my 6 younger brothers and sisters.
It just so happens, my cellmate in Parkland was a Tennessee State graduate who ended up not being able to go back to school in Tennessee State, Larry Hunter. Larry and I were cellmates in Parchment. And I remember when we went back to Parchment for the 50-year reunion, one of the comments that made to me was, I've been carrying this baggage with me, this heavy load for 50 years. And it wasn't about him being in the cell in Parkland as such, but the fact that his school did not let him back in along with other graduates. And then recent years we honored them with honorary degrees. So there are sacrifices made on a rather variety of ends. My situation was a little different in that I had a supportive community about it, so that when I returned back to school, my God, I guess that was one way that attracted my wife. I could make claims that other students couldn't make. And then I could get her into situations there on the campus that other students couldn't, because I was the only student brought to the campus by the president of the university. And I used those opportunities to date my wife. So one of the best things that came out of being a Freedom Ride was to meet my wife for 51 years.
Well, my college, Duke University, at first they basically wanted to expel us. I didn't need it. When I applied to Tougaloo, my high school refused to send my transcripts to Tougaloo. But they said they'd accept me based on my Duke record. And it was over 50 years before I had further contact with them, with my high school, when the current people, not knowing the history, invited me to be the commencement speaker. And I let them know the history. But my family was divided. My father, being from Southwest Iowa and a good government bureaucrat, was against this nonviolent guerrilla warfare that just went town to town to town, felt you should change the law at the top and it will affect everyone. Of course, the students felt, and how long ago was Brown versus Ford? But I think his main worry was his darling daughter would get killed, not unreasonable. My mother, being from the rural South, was completely against what we were doing, and it never changed, and literally through her dying day, I'll say the story. But she was a wonderful grandmother, and that was when we began to work out a relationship again for her to be grandma and take the kids to McDonald's every Wednesday.
Mr. Diamond, I believe you kind of addressed some of this a little while ago. You said you've come a long way, we've come a long way, we have a long way to go. I was just wondering, based on your experiences of 50, 60 years ago and your experiences since then, if you have any comments or recommendations or thoughts on how we can address one of the problems I see today, and that is the wall of mistrust, misunderstanding, and possibly based in segregation between primarily young black people, men and women today, and our law enforcement forces. There's just a wall between them that, as we read the newspaper, the media today, has led to so many unnecessary deaths on both sides. I'm not saying one side right, one side wrong, but this is an issue that we're going to have to address if we're going to go forward. And look forward to your comments.
Let me hide under the table.
I'm going to be under there.
If I can answer that, I'm certain I'll be in the president's cabinet. Sir, my view of that issue is that because the younger folk today are the product of folks who've been stepped on for so long. And again, this evolutionary activity of protest. The power structure is, let's see if I can get this together, because in a way, there's several different responses in my head. Let's see if I can put them together. Aside from persons of color having been stepped on for so long, and we are all the products of past older generations. So all of the problems that have been foisted upon our parents, our grandparents, etc., have filtered down, and they have built a distrust. And because, again, of how protests have escalated, kids today, with all the baggage of their forebears, are just saying, hey, enough. Now, you're asking me how can we correct that? I believe that's your question. I'm giving you a response that says, I understand why we are where we are. But in terms of correcting it, we have got to get to the kids. For people who are 50 and older, we're pretty much set in our ways. Either you're liberal or you're conservative, or you're just neutral, just taking up space.
Amen.
Yeah. I believe if we don't get the message like we are suggesting tonight to the kids, we are lost. because they're the ones that are going to have to make the change. We can only look back and encourage them to make the change. But again, I think this educational aspect that we are suggesting to you, that's tomorrow. Please do it today in order that the kids of today become the leaders of tomorrow and correct some of the images. Now, police are like the representative of the power structure. Okay? And if we are down in the power structure, we most certainly, who's the obvious person to take it out of? Am I making any sense?
He's spoken on one side of the issue. I think the militarization of the police sort of sets up that if somebody's coming at you in military outfits, military weapons, and driving a tank, you feel like you're under siege and you're going to respond accordingly. I think if we back off a bit in the way that police present themselves, that will help to de-escalate it. And I understand from the top down, there's a realization that given all this surplus military equipment to the local police has had some negative consequences.
That's a good point.
It does make a difference in a young person's life when, on the one hand, they have to be told by their parents early on that if you're driving and if you're stopped, maybe a traffic violation or whatever, to know what to do if you're stopped by police. That is to say, if it's at night, make sure the light on, your hand on the wheels, they don't see any movement, or if it's during the day, certain tactic you use. Now, the tragedy in that is that we as African American kids are having to be taught that, having to be told that by their parents. What is the language being told by other side of that in terms of how they're treated? So it comes down to what I think John was pretty much speaking to the whole absence of the kind of training needed by law enforcement agencies, whether rural or urban, so that we begin to have more dialogue about it. I don't think we talk as much about issues like this, and this becomes another forum for us at least broach the notion that this is a serious issue out here that we still have to address it. I wish we had the answer. We had the answer to it. We all would be shouting in the streets, glory and honor, ain't got time to die.
Lord knows I don't have the answer to that, and it grieves me tremendously that so often the encounters, especially of young black men with police officers, results in their death or unfair incarceration or their physical damage. I have no answers. Or I would be in the president's cabinet. But I do think part of the answer has to be with police officers. Law enforcement needs better training, but they also have an obligation to weed out the bad apples. There are some people who go into law enforcement not to protect and serve the community, but in all honesty because they're bullies and they got a badge and it gives them the permission to act out their worst fantasies. I am distressed that the police departments don't weed out those bad apples before they hurt people. They know who they are. I mean, they're in the locker rooms and they're in the shower rooms and, they go out and they socialize with you. They know who the bad apples are. So I do think that that's one small way that we might begin to address the issue, along with training and along with, I would hate to have to tell my son how to behave in public so that he could stay alive when he encountered the people that we pay taxes to protect and service. What an awful dilemma that is. I pray about it, and if you have an answer that I can have a role in, let me know.
All right, we've got time, I think, for a couple more. Is it, Sam?
Not necessarily a question, but we've spoken to the music that held you together and gave you the courage and support. And I think most of us are familiar with the song "We Shall Overcome." But there was another song of the civil rights movement that really speaks to me, and I hope would speak to everybody in this room. We have to do it together. The song was, "One man's hands can't tear a prison down. Two men's hands can't tear a prison down. But if 2 and 2 and 50 make a million, we'll see that day come around. We'll see that day come around." It takes us working together, reaching across lines.
The thing with the music we talked about earlier, how that kept us going. And each of us has a favorite song out of the movement. But one I've grown attached to so much, and I'll try to do that tonight. It just says, "Oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom over me. Before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free." So bear with me. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more Jim Crow. No more Jim Crow. No more Jim Crow over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Then it says, no more dying, no more dying, no more dying over me. I'm going to see if y'all do that verse with me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Y'all want to try that with me? Okay, what we saying that? No more dying, right? Just repeat that 3 times. Let's go. No more dying. Everybody say it now. No more dying. No more dying over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Y'all want to make sure I tell you who my backup singer was, I mentioned earlier. The fellow's name was a fellow named Marvin Gaye. Marvin was the first in a little group that we would create, in junior school, make up a little quartets, and we'd compete with each other in talent shows. And I always knew I had a chance because Marvin was in the group that I was a part of.